Hey team, welcome back to the Microforge. On today's video, we're going on an adventure. That's right, we're flying 2,000 kilometers over to New Zealand with 4 kilos of resin, a whole bunch of XPS foam to go and build ruins with a certain YouTube terrain builder. But first, we gotta pack those bags. So we've arrived in Christchurch, Aotearoa, aka New Zealand, aka Middle Earth. The weather is glorious, just FYI. Amazing, love some rain. Let's go and meet our mystery YouTube terrain maker.
It just doesn't stop. The man, the myth, the legend. LB from Microforge Minis is here, and oh my lord. Have you brought a lot of stuff, dude?
Mate, I've got all of your resin needs. Also, a little bit of the old gold.
The old gold. Many viewers are often commenting, why does Lockie keep saying his gold foam? It's just habit. It's because of this.
With introductions out of the way, Lockie and I quickly got down to business. First, I took Lockie through all of the new pieces he hadn't seen before to get the ideas percolating. It was time to sort all the pieces to make the whole crafting process over the next 2 days way easier, and then it was straight into the crafting. Lockie got off and running with his first piece, which used the new pavilion set.
Oh, that's so satisfying.
Whilst I tinkered with a few little archways.
Zorba is taking an early lead over Microforge Minis here. I've got my first little structure happening. One structure, and we are like halfway through day one.
We got to engage speed mode here.
Yeah, a little less yakking, a little more slicing and slotting, I think.
With speed mode engaged, we started cranking out the ruins. Every time I looked across the table, Lockie was cooking up some new or different way of combining pieces that I had never even considered. Don't get me wrong, I have spent a long time thinking about how every piece could interact, but there's nothing like seeing the pieces being used in the wild. This was a real pressure test for Slice and Slot, and I was so happy to see how well all the pieces work together in every one of Lockie's mad schemes. Of course, if you want more details on Lockie's crafting process, make sure you go and check out his video where he gives more details on all the terrain that we crafted over the space of the weekend. It's kind of weird to admit, but in all the time I've spent designing Slice and Slot, I've really only created about 20 terrain pieces using the system. This is down to a number of factors. I have 2 young kids, I work a full-time job that requires a fair amount of travel, I'm renovating my house, and I still try and design and create new Slice and Slot pieces when I'm not trying to make YouTube content. And that doesn't even factor in when I'm trying to do my own actual hobby time, which basically doesn't exist anymore. It was an absolute blast staying with Lockie and actually spending 2 full days just crafting. It really reinvigorated my hobby mojo, and there were loads of little tips and tricks that I picked up over the course of the weekend. It's funny, our hobby is so often a solitary experience, and yet some of the best memories I have in recent times is crafting terrain with other people. If you haven't ever given it a try, I highly recommend it. Especially if you are thinking about just getting into terrain crafting, I really recommend reaching out to a friend or a local hobbyist who has a passion for terrain making and seeing if they're willing to hang out, craft, and share a couple of their tips and knowledge. Our time was quickly drawing to a close, but we did manage to slap a base coat of paint on all the ruins to give us that completionist dopamine hit before it was time for me to jump back in the car and head to the airport.
Crafting with 2 people.
It's so good.
Yeah. I wasn't lonely. But it's also like you never stop because you're always chasing the other person, the motivation, and like, oh, what are they doing?
Yeah, the inspiration is really interesting, and especially seeing like someone like yourself, master crafter, get a hold of these pieces.
Yeah.
It has inspired me to use things very differently.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, and the same thing. You built this stuff. You know how to use it. I've been building it the one way, Minas Tirith. I'm like, oh man, that's a gnarly way to use that piece. Right. Well, I guess it's time to get you back to the airport.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah.
We gotta go.
Yeah, let's go.
When I got back to my hobby desk, I still had Lockie's voice echoing in my head.
If only there were arches cut in half that I could stick flat against these walls and give the pieces a bit more depth.
So these pieces were actually developed as part of the Kickstarter. And the idea is that they're only half the profile, so you can stick them flat and just give a bit of depth to a wall, 5mm thick in this case. I was thinking about what Lockie was saying. This is exactly what he was talking about. So why don't we build one last ruin and send that one over to Lockie so that he can see how these work. And I'll even throw in a few extras for him so that he can have a play too.
So for this ruin, I'm going to be using a 5mm thick piece of foam for the blind arcades and a 10mm thick foam piece for the backing. I use the 5mm piece to locate where I will insert the windows and make sure I don't waste any time carving stonework that will get covered up when I assemble the piece in future. On the back face of the piece, I go about my normal process of carving out the stonework and making sure that the edges are all nice and ruined and worn down, and once that's done, it's time to glue in the windows. I trace the outline of the 5mm piece of foam based off what I've already established on the 10mm backing piece, and I cut away all the excess foam. Here I am making sure to cut a little extra foam off this 5mm piece so that I get a nice stepped stonework look that helps to give the piece a little bit more depth. With that all done, I can start to assemble the piece. I thought this old statue from Games Workshop would make the perfect centerpiece, but I do need to cut off the base just to make sure that it fits comfortably in the archway. Now here's the first tip I got from Lockie. Use construction adhesive to glue everything together. It works for the foam to foam pieces, and more importantly, it works really well for the resin pieces gluing into the foam. This is the best option that I have found, as the glue takes about 20 minutes to dry, and in that time you can manipulate it and move it around and make sure that it's all positioned correctly. Also, it can act as a bit of a filler if you have any gaps. It just works really, really well. It's better than hot glue because, to be honest, the hot glue doesn't really secure the piece in place. And it's better than 2-part epoxy because you've got more working time and you're not having to constantly go back and mix up more batches. I wanted to create more three-dimensionality to the piece. Is that a word? Probably not. Anyway, I wanted to create an upper level and give the piece more stability. So I carved up this back wall to give the ruin, I guess you'd call it a T-shape configuration, and then created a floor out of foam to go on top as well. As part of that floor, I created the beginnings or the remains of a staircase that had since collapsed, just to hint what this building would have been before it was ruined. Once that was all glued in place, I got ready to add an extra half ruined archway on the upper level. This would add a bit more height to the overall piece and give a little bit more variation and break up the symmetry of that front wall as well. Symmetry is often the enemy, especially when you're dealing with anything that is ruined. And given that I kind of started out with a symmetrical composition, the whole journey of this piece was seeing how I could actually kind of move away from that symmetrical composition and break it up throughout the rest of the piece. Then it was time to add my favorite balustrades, which just instantly add such a great level of detail. Whenever I'm putting these into ruins, I always like cutting into them to really make the piece feel like it has crumbled over time and is slowly being worn away. The last piece to glue in was the statue, which just got a dab of construction adhesive on the back. This stuff is so good. And then the piece was finished and ready for painting. Now, I started the painting process by trying to match what Lockie had done, but as you'll see, I kind of got a little bit carried away in the end. I started out with a dark grey base coat and then progressively hit it with successively lighter dry brushes, with the final highlight being just a pure cream dry brush. By the way, if you're enjoying the video and you haven't yet subscribed, maybe you should think about hitting that subscribe and that bell button so that you know when we drop these videos. I came back with a mix of Citadel washes and contrast paints to try and break up the amount of grey across the piece, just picking out random bricks and making sure that I paint over multiple bricks without refilling my brush so that you get a little bit of subtle variation between intense greens, less intense greens, and some browns as well. Once I was happy with that, I quickly put a mix of green, black, and brown inks into the airbrush and just focused on spraying this in all the corners and at the bottom of the piece to give it a little bit more of a blended and weathered look. The final step in the painting process was to come back and do one last dry brush of that pure cream. And this paint really helped to tone down all of the different washes and really bring the whole piece together. And there we have it, one last ruin to send over to Zorpazorp to add to his mega Armon-Hen build. Thanks again to Lockie for taking me in, letting me crash at his joint and craft for 2 days straight. Of course, go and check out his video, links in the description. And until we are next together, have fun hobbying.